Welcome to the STARS program, seniors taking active roles in society. And now, here's your host, Anita Finley.
This is going to be a very, very special interview. You've probably heard of Mary Barnes before. She's the CEO of Alzheimer's Community Care. And you probably don't know much about that, but just remember her name. For those of you who maybe take the New York Times and you saw in this past week, the Sunday, there was an insert in the New York Times about Alzheimer's. It was, 8-10 pages, which is pretty rare. But you see, when I read that, I remember when I first met Mary, probably almost 30 years ago, there's this nice lady who was talking about this disease that nobody even knew. We used to think it was senile dementia. Who knew? And Mary knew something. She was such a futurist with this. So I'm so glad to have you come in. I know you have a very busy schedule, but go ahead and make us aware.
Well, Anita, as you so eloquently said, to have a 14-page article in the New York Times is big, big, big. And it's exciting because it's really propelling the conversation, which you've got the baby boomers now. And one of the things that I've noticed and always known about the baby boomers, they're not going to go quiet into the night when it comes to this disease. So having the New York Times and the way the reporter so graphically and eloquently stated certain aspects of the disease process was really very, very exciting for me. And it's inspiring because of the fact that, I have caregivers in my office many, many times during the week. And especially when it's that first visit, especially when it's that first time that this person is talking about his wife and this husband, this loving husband, and talking about what answers he's getting from the different processes of the diagnosing. And then I have to kind of frame it and to say to him, well, you're not a husband anymore, you're now a caregiver, which is a awesome responsibility. And this is where Alzheimer's Community Care comes in, because you can't do this alone.
Let me tell you then, you'll appreciate this. I know you know who Alex Dreyfus is.
Yes, I do.
And Alex wrote a book, a fabulous book. They asked me to interview him and do a book review, which I did. And he was on his yacht in the Bahamas, and we were talking. He came in the first time, and it was easier. When someone's here, no matter what, you can see how they're slipping or they're feeling. But here, so we did one, and it was so good. I said, let's do another one. And so he's in the Bahamas, and we're talking, and all of a sudden he lost a word, and I could see that. He said, forgive me, that's my Alzheimer's. I mean, that's, and and that was a beautiful thing that he could talk about. Look, it's my heart, it's my Alzheimer's. And then he just continued on.
Well, I didn't realize that he wrote a book, and I want to make sure I get it, because I'll tell you why.
You have to go to the Kravis Center. They're marketing it for them.
Oh, they're marketing? Okay.
Yes, you should.
But I was so inspired by when he said he wasn't going to let Alzheimer's dictate his destiny, that he was going to continue with his wife to go to, because they love to travel. They do visit, he's fortunate enough to have a yacht to go on, but he wanted to continue to enjoy life. Because you know what? One of the things it's just like what cancer was years and years ago. When cancer was first spoken, you only had a matter of days to live with it. Once the doctor spoke that evil word, cancer. And yet people had to live with it. And unlike cancer, you always had your ability to share the pain and share what was going on. Unfortunately, it doesn't happen after a while, as the forgetfulness and as Alzheimer's steals more and more of that person's life and essence. But I loved in this article the way they framed that early stage, because it is for all of us in healthcare, especially in our organization, since we know so much about how the disease progresses and how much the caregiver goes through the process. We have always been an organization that has always engulfed both the caregiver and the patient. Now they're all coming out and saying this, and they're commercializing it more and more, which I find very, very frustrating. But at least everybody's recognizing it. So this is what we are so happy about. But to us, we operate in a unit. It's always with the caregiver and the patient. It can be the daughter. It can be the son-in-law. It can be multitudes of people interacting on this responsibility.
I just met a woman the other day, and I'm not going to go through who she is or anything, but pretty prominent person. And she told me that her husband is in a facility that specializes in Alzheimer's and lives there, and that he has a few girlfriends. And you know the story.
Yes, I do.
And she's so smart, though, that she goes there and she loves it. She can go and see him enjoying himself, and he acts like he's in love again. And she's okay with that, which I really admired her for, because she knows that's not really the person who was her husband.
He has, because of the way the disease operates, he transferred his needs in caring and dealing with his because we're born with an incurable need for relationships. That's in all of us, okay? And he needed that relationship building, and so he did do that. Not that he doesn't love her in like he wants to love everyone, but that's where his needs are right now.
And so you were talking about the caregivers. So those caregivers, she was extraordinary. They have to understand that, because I'm sure a lot of them don't.
Well, they don't, and I'll give you a perfect example, and I can mention her. His name is former Supreme Court Justice Sandra Day O'Connor. She wrote in her own article about she and her husband were soulmates, just like Nancy Reagan felt about Ronnie would always know me, and couldn't believe that this transition of this relationship when she did, and I'm going back to Sandra Day O'Connor, who gave up the bench to take care of her husband, thinking that with this care and love would kind of slow up the disease or would kind of stop it maybe because of this soulmate relationship. And of course it didn't. And she had to eventually put him in a facility. She did a lot of homework. She did a lot of research, which one must do. And she put him in, and then he had a relationship and a friendship with another patient. And it came to realize that, he can do this because he was that kind of human being. I would have been, if I'd have been there in Washington, D.C., and if I had learned, I would have asked her not to do this, because she was a caregiver at that point and others could help. And that's the message. That's the next message that I think that we as professionals need to explain to everybody who are being given the responsibility of being a caregiver. 65% of women who are aging will either be a patient themselves or be the caregiver. Us women really carry a lot of the care and the I don't want to use the word burden, because that's a negative term, because
it's an activity.
as was said in this New York Times article, there are moments of happiness, and there are moments of sharing still your life together, but you need to be able to be open to that and understand that.
And I know you've seen a lot of the commercials, and what I'm loving is I'm seeing the commercial with someone who has Alzheimer's, because they're talking about a particular prescription. But the men, it's like the son has taken on the responsibility of the mother, which I have loved. Mm-hmm. There's one, I think it's an African-American family, and the man is there with his mom and then the children, and he's doing all this. Isn't that lovely?
It is. And with the families able to accept this disease process without even the acknowledgement of the disease, if we can get as an organization in there early enough to not have these relationships broken and not having it's the legal things you got to identify with, it's the financial situation to help who's going to be the community spouse and be able to support and go, not have this burden over them of the financial issues. Somehow getting us in there early enough. And now you're starting to see and understand earlier patients that you're getting at 52 and 53. Now that process is going to be very fast. And how do we get help for that? We're needed more critically than ever. And there are solutions to certain aspects. For instance, if you have a person or a loved one who has Alzheimer's at 52, the Compassionate Act with Social Security, you can get your Social Security benefits within a month.
Excellent.
And that's was called the Compassionate Act.
They probably
and
don't
it was
even
done,
know this.
It was done especially for those Alzheimer, early stage Alzheimer. The only frustration I have is that you can't get health care insurance. It isn't like you can get Medicare. And there's that window is very short at that time, and medical needs get to be very, very, very critical.
I think that's why we're so happy to have Mary Barnes on our show today to apprise all of you. If this is something that you're having a problem, you're concerned with, she is the head of Alzheimer's Community Care. It's a great organization. There's lots of daycare. There's lots of counseling, information. Let me tell you how you will find her. You can call the number at 561-683-2700. That's 683-2700. Or you can go on their website, which is alzcare, alzcare.org, alzcare.org. And something that I have to just applaud you for, the conferences that you do once a year. Mm-hmm. And I know you have another one coming up. You probably even have a date for it.
No, we just finished it.
I know you did.
We had in March, but we're planning the next one.
Right, I know that, in March.
Which is going to be March of 2017 on the 16th and 17th. So please write that down. And
March
if you go to
16th and 17th, go to your website and they'll be able to see that.
Yep.
And why don't you tell people, before you go into the conference, tell them about your daycare, because that's so beautiful.
It is. And I hate calling it a daycare because it doesn't really identify it's a form of lifestyle.
So what do you want to call it?
Oh, I don't know what to call
Life
it.
care?
It's an intervention.
Spa.
It's an intervention for families, for patients to be themselves,
No,
and to be with their
isn't.
peers.
No,
well,
it's something else. Let's just say it's
not,
a safe.
It's a safe haven.
Yeah, safe haven.
It's a place where, and we have many individuals who, families. It's really the families that have a tough time coping with the process. If the environment and if there's that acceptance and understanding and knowing how to get help is really there, the burden isn't so heavy on the family. And to understand, there is a quote out of this New York Times article that I love. It says, "Our challenges of writing about Alzheimer's in its first stage is it's invisible. It's invisibility, which is true. Its effect is vivid near the end, not in the beginning. It's internal. One of the frustrations that Mrs. Taylor, this is the patient they talked about, and others have, is that when they reveal their condition to people, they are told, you don't seem like there is anything wrong, as if they were playing a prank." And when that's said in front of the patient or said of that person, they're being themselves. They're being themselves at where they are now. And to make notice of it is kind of like, it's hurtful. And that's and to frame that way was, I think, so eloquent, because there's a person there. There's an intelligent person. When you say Alzheimer's, that doesn't mean that they've lost that intelligence at that point in time, but their judgment is impaired. And that's the struggle that we have in helping that person, and especially, men don't understand why they've had to give up driving. Women don't understand, why does my husband need somebody to come in and clean and do other types of chores when I can handle it myself? And yet, in all fairness, they can't, because their memory is short and don't realize that they're not doing it. But they don't feel like these necessities, which is all part of the whole role of caregiving and being the patient.
Well, just for the benefit of explaining what a daycare center is, even though I know that affects you, but I want to tell you the positive parts about that. I know of a man who goes to work and he has no one else to take care of his mother. So his mother lives with him. She has Alzheimer's. So he gets her to a daycare center in the morning, takes care of her all day. Then he comes back from work, and that's how they can live.
Yeah.
So it's really incredible that you have done. But talk about what happens when someone does take someone there.
When we have the first time a person comes to the daycare, they kind of feel like, well, I'm not like those old people, or I don't want to go back. But the staff is so intuitive and so warm and so friendly that and we tell the caregiver, bring him back again or bring her back again, because it's like every Alzheimer's patient, because of their memory being impaired, they're afraid. If there's anything that you know about that person, in that even in the very earlier stages, there's a fear. So we know that. And so it's our job to help that fear go away. And so it's all by body language. It's all by hugging. It's all about the warm embracing, mentally, physically, emotionally. All that is what we're all trained, because we understand how this disease operates. So this person comes in, and of course, there's nothing better as socialization of sharing some coffee or sharing some sort of tea or sharing some sort of juice or some sort of, breakfast kind of snacks and stuff. And according to what their diet is, if there's diabetes, we have to watch about that as well. But anyway, then we get the social ball going, and then we get the conversation. If that person, that caregiver, could come back about maybe, say they came in at 8 o'clock in the morning, because our daycare is open at 7:30, but say they come in at 8 o'clock and they would come back at 10:30, they'd see entirely two different people. They'd hear a person enjoying the music. They'd see the person enjoying, we do a lot of mental quizzes, and we go to the newspaper, we go to it's just a lot of interaction, especially during the morning hours, because that's when everybody's rested. We also have a nurse that works always on the floor. And that nurse is, because we have the progression of the disease, that nurse is watching to see where that progression and how fast it is and what's going on, and especially if they're on any medication. That nurse is always assessing and is able to help the caregiver. The caregiver, sometimes when they come in and they'll say, well, Mom didn't sleep too good last night. Well, why is that? Why didn't Mom? Okay, she says, I don't know. She says, something seems to be, bothering her. Well, what's bothering her? And, the keen eye of our patient, of our nurse, this really happened. She says, her color is not all that good either. And as the morning went on, she called back the caregiver and says, I'm really worried about Mom. I said, things, her name would be Maggie, And so he says, well, what's your concern? She says, her coloring isn't good. She seems to be, her gait isn't that steady. I'm concerned. Well, come to find out, after she'd been taken to the hospital, she had a blood clot on the lung. And you know what? There have been many times that the nurses in our daycare, who are, an intricate part of our staffing, has stopped hospitalization. And we only don't do any more than 35 patients at a time in our daycare, and we do 1 on 6. And we are governed under the license of the Specialized Alzheimer's Daycare Act, which we developed ourselves through legislation. And because I feel we wanted to raise the bar. We wanted to raise the bar of care. And we do have a lot of success of keeping the family together in the community. And that's what our families want. Our families do not want to lose mom or dad or wife or husband to this disease so quickly. But we are the one game changer when it comes to putting people having to think about institutionalization.
So you have talked about caregivers so much, and I know even when I ask you this, the support that you give them, do you have special classes and things for them?
Yes, we do. And we also have been known to have a men's in the kitchen kind of class and train in having men learn how to cook and understand what is this microwave, and what do these different buttons all mean, and also on top of the stove, and how do you boil water even? I mean, some of these men don't even know how to boil water, So it's really, and they become, because we don't make the class too big. We like to keep it around 10, maybe 12, but no more. We even have a nutritionist that donates her time to this project, okay? And so we learned this from a minister up in Martin County who did it with his own congregation, men from the congregation, especially when he found out that they lost their wives or their wives had to be put into a nursing home, that he started this, and we learned from him on what it meant to be the men in the kitchen. And it's been a huge success. But after they get through this 6-week or 8-week, like a couple of hours once a week, they bond. They continue that friendship after the class is all over. And, that's what's so important in opening up that relationship door. We get so into our marriages and we get so into the care. And of course, you're doing it for a long time. And then we forget how to be engaged again. And a lot of times our caregivers, they don't have the energy anymore. And so our job during this whole process, and it could be 2 to 20 years, the average being 8 to 10. So we have a long time relationship. So that the caregivers seeing how their loved ones has engaged in their own lifestyle. Basically, when you look at our lives, we're not meant to live with our spouses 24/7. We used to go off to work. We would have other kinds of responsibilities, raising our families and stuff. So we always had that break.
It's like you and I. We're here away from our husbands, right?
Right. And you know what? Yeah. It's the best thing. And so, but our job is to make sure that that patient is having a lifestyle that is befitting to where they're at. And that's why we do 1-on-5, because we have all these activities going on. Sometimes we break up into other clusters according to, we learn what did this person do in their life? What was their vocation? What was it that was so special? So we understand when certain episodes of memory, past engagements, of where are they at that point in time. It's our job. When we see that change in behavior, it's like we see a tumor. It's like a tumor. It's something that we have to apply medication to. And that is through understanding. That is through some sort of activity that can make that pain go away.
This beautiful woman you're listening to is something else, and she has such a long history, and she should have many awards for all she's done. Mary Barnes, CEO of Alzheimer's Community Care. For more information, call 561-683-2700, 683-2700, and the website is alzcare.org, alzcare.org, and you'll find so many things on that. Mary, so when you have different categories of the seriousness of the Alzheimer's people who come in there.
Yes.
So at some point, it's just too much for you to handle?
There comes a point in time when the safety of the patient becomes very critical. If the patient becomes so wheelchair bound that we have to literally lift that person up by 2 people and they can't stand and have their equilibrium, then we have to talk about the patient and talk about the safety. But we have learned we've had patients with us for 15 years. And we have one patient in Pahokee. She's been with us 16 years, and her cognition is a 2, which means she's very severely impaired. But she gets up every day. She's able to dress herself. She's able to, because of this routine that we have her on. And routine is everything. Any type of stress, any type of upsetting of routine has a great impact, especially as the person progresses into the disease. So that is critical, whether you're keeping that person at home, and you should demand it if you're having it if that person needs to go into a nursing home. A lot of homework. We do a lot of vetting on nursing homes, home health agencies. We just don't go to the telephone book, or we just don't. We bring these agencies in, and we have, some of these agencies call it a drilling. I don't like to call it a drilling. It's just that we're trying to figure out what their staff is capable of. And that's critical to us. And matter of fact, I'm going up to Tallahassee on May 16th because there's the rules for the assisted living facilities is being looked at being changed by the Department of Elder Affairs. And they've been approached to change. I'm not quite sure who's asking to change. I don't know whether it's ACA or I don't know if it's the department. But we are going up to testify that not only should they not gut the training capacity of those workers and professionals in a nursing home, but we want them to upgrade the training. So it's really going to be an interesting interaction. Because we are going, I'm driving up.
That's your cup of tea, lady.
Well, I just can't believe.
I know that.
With the Baker Act and we have definitely against having people Baker Acted, and because there's no investment in that. But we need to come up with a different way to do that, which I agree. And it's going to cost a little money, But the bigger money is when you have them in the nursing home for all those many, many years. And so the trade-off is that, yes, let's keep them in the community, but we've got to make sure that the medical issues are addressed as this disease progresses as well.
Let's talk about some of the things that I know you really have invented. The silver. Let's talk about
the silver alert.
The silver alert, and also the way you've done training for the policemen. Because early on, I remember so much of this from you. When the policemen would see someone and they looked strange and they didn't know what they were doing, they would put them in a holding bin or something.
Yeah, we had a situation where early before I even knew the word Alzheimer's, I had just moved down from Connecticut, and I was working for a social service agency. I'd worked up for a college, and they didn't have any kind of a program like I had up in Connecticut. But anyway, I was working for this social service agency, and I was overseeing volunteers. I had a great group of volunteers. I must have had over 100. Right now, Alzheimer's Community Care has almost 300, but that was 100. And they were calling, there's a set of volunteers that were just calling people every day. So one little lady, her name was Grace, and she was alone, and she wanted us to call. It was a telephone reassurance program. And so Helen would call her up every Friday, and we'd had different volunteers, and they were the same volunteers. We were very fortunate. It was a very stable, and so Helen called up Grace that morning, and she says, Grace sounded kind of confused. Okay. I said, what do you mean confused? I didn't, And she said, I don't know. She says she didn't sound herself. Okay. Well, that night, she said, Mary, she wants you to call her. So I said, okay. So I called her. It was after 5 o'clock Friday night. And I gave her a call, and I said, Grace, I said, what's going on? And there was a man that said, who are you talking to? And come to find out, it was a police officer. And the police officer was there to arrest her because she had put in a bottle of aspirin in her pocket, and she forgot she had it. So I asked Grace to put the police officer on the phone, and he said, yes, he introduced himself, and I told him who I was. And he says, the store manager at this drugstore was pushing and pressing charges. I said, woman has $500,000 in her bank account. She would not steal anything. She just forgot. So I had to educate the store manager. He dropped it. But if you don't have people around there, that person's going to get consumed in illegal.
And Mary, we're going to have you back again because there is so much to talk about, and you're so helpful. And thank you very much for coming in. I know you're so busy, but you have helped people who are listening to this, and thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, Anita.